So you made the choice. You want to go pro. You want to make a living with your hobby that you love so much. You're tired of working for the man by the hour and you want to start your own business in woodworking? Well, in part 2 of Going Pro, we're going to go ahead and talk about how to set up your shop. Now, I already did part 1. Go back and watch that after. There's no real reason for everything to be in order. But we're going to keep this series going. So I started my business with nothing but a borrowed Sawzall and some Harbor Freight hand tools. And I want to share with you some of the things that I learned along the way so that I can help you avoid some of my mistakes and be as profitable as possible. So get subscribed and let's get started. Okay, so one thing right out of the gate, there's nuance to every topic, right? And we love to make blanket statements on the internet, and I don't want to do that. So there's a difference between a small shop and a large shop, right? And there's different fundamentals that come into place. So as we go through this video, there's going to be times where I talk about things that are specific to large shops, things that are specific to small shops. A lot of things are going to overlap, okay? So I just want to get that out of the way. And that's important because if you're sitting on thousands of square foot of space versus hundreds of square foot of space, that's a big difference. Now you can do good work out of both. This is about a 400 square foot space right here, but I do have a separate finishing shop. But I also don't have employees. So all of that context matters, and I just want to go ahead and get that out of the way, that as we talk about all of this, just keep in mind, some things really work well in big spaces, but not in small, and vice versa. All right, so this is the biggest thing that I see, especially in a small shop space, and that is you pack every square inch full of tools. You have 4 workbenches because you need a hand tool workbench, you need an assembly workbench, you need your MFT, you need your out feed table for your table saw. And what ends up happening is you don't have any room to actually build the things, right? If you're a hobbyist and the shop is just your happy place, that's perfectly fine. But you're in business now, we're trying to make money. And if you don't have room to actually build things, especially particularly big things, which sometimes pay a bunch of money, like this built-in behind me that I'm working on, you have to have space to actually assemble things, store things as you go from one process to another. So what you really want, now just to give you scale, this is how big this is, right? I have to actually be able to assemble this, make sure all my dimensions are right. The first time I put this together, it's not going to be on the job site. Nor do I want the first time it gets put together to be a carpenter putting it together on the job site. I need to know that it's going to fit. So you have to have space for these kind of things. Now, if I had a large shop, guess what? There would be like 3 more projects in here right now. That's the beauty of a large shop. You can do things at scale. But as is in the space that I'm working in, I'm going to put the final touches on this later today, then it's going to go over to finishing, and I'm going to immediately start on the next project because I have them booked out. So there will be another built-in in here by Monday. It's Thursday as I'm filming. So if you have a small space, yeah, you need to utilize every square inch of it, but not for tools. You need to utilize it for actually doing the job. And like I said, that's a big project. So yeah, I don't have a joiner in here. Not that I don't want a joiner. I have to work around not having a joiner. I use a track saw. But if I had a joiner in here, it would probably be occupying some of that space right there where I have that assembled right now. So that's a big one, is do not overclutter. If you don't actually need the tool, if you don't use the tool, if it's taking up space, get rid of it, right? Or put it in storage or something like that. Don't overdo it. Like, this is no longer a game of who can have the most tools. You know, we're in business now. It's who can make the most money, right? So you need to be able to, no matter what your shop is, you need to have a space big enough to fit the projects that you're actually working on. Now, if all you build is smalls, that's a little bit different. But if you want to do cabinetry or something like that, or building tables, desks, anything like that, you need a space at least big enough to fit your mom. So there you go. Okay, here's another one that I pretty constantly see. And that is that people spend an enormous amount of time trying to plan the space, okay? What do I mean by that? They get on SketchUp or they buy these pattern things where they can fit every little tool and turn it this way or that way and everything's to scale, and they can spend 2-3 days just trying to figure out the shop layout. And guess what happens? You get in there and you work in it and it doesn't actually work, okay? So if you have a small space, you know, you're kind of forced into working with what you have. So in other words, like having your milling triangle may be impossible, right? So you have to sort of work within the confines. And all the planning in the world, you get in there and you actually start working, especially if you're building like fixed furniture or anything like that. then you find out it doesn't work. That kind of sucks. So skip all of that. Now, on a large space, it's the same deal. You plan everything out meticulously and stuff like that, and then you actually get in there and into the process and you realize like, oh, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. So generally speaking, when you first start, what I try to tell people is A, kind of know what you're building. If you're like me and you build a little bit of everything, that sort of sucks. And then have a general guideline from that. And then what you can start to do is, as you actually get into the space, you start to find your friction. Like, oh, this sucks, this is a pain in the ass, this is hard to move, this is hard to do that, I'm constantly trying to get this tool, that tool. When you find those friction points, or in the larger shop, you're gonna find bottlenecks where things start to stack up, especially if you have employees, then you can start to alleviate that friction. So your shop should evolve as you go. Like my shop, if you go back to the 2025 shop tour, I actually filmed that in December, my space has changed dramatically since then. Okay, so that's a big one, is don't take a ton of time planning out your space, because guess what? Every plan is gonna change. So I would say skip a lot of that and get in there, actually start working in it, because that's what's gonna really tell you things, is you actually have to get in there and say, oh, yep, this sucks, change it. Oh, this is great, I'm gonna lean into this. So that's a big one. Don't spend a ton of time planning out your space, just get in there and start working. Okay, now let's talk about identifying that workflow, that friction, and those bottlenecks, right? So let's give a really good example of that, okay? Let's say you have a large space and you're a cabinet shop. Now, what a huge part of your workflow is gonna be your plywood. Where is it stored, and then where does it start going through the process, right? So in my small space here, I do a lot of cabinet builds. So I do use a lot of plywood. Now, in a small shop, storing plywood is a nightmare. So much so that I do not store it in my shop. The time it takes me to go over, grab a sheet or two or whatever of plywood, or have it in my trailer right outside the door, whatever that may be, it's actually way more efficient for me overall to just bring that in, it goes straight to my table saw right here, and I start working it, right? I don't have 30 sheets of 4x8 plywood. That would take up an enormous amount of room in here, and that real estate is more valuable than that time that I saved by doing so. Now, maybe you're a furniture builder and everything you do is with hardwood. And basically at that point, your workflow is going to start with your hardwood lumber. Again, in a large shop, where does that get delivered? Where do you store it? First step's mill it. So then you're going to kind of work from there. So your hardwood storage is right next to your milling triangle or whatever it may be, and then it works through the process from there. And then it's going to end with finishing typically. And what you'll find is, as you work on a project and it moves from zone to zone to zone, it may get hung up here for a really long time. So how do you speed that up? Is there a way that you can avoid that spot? Is there a tool you can buy to make that spot more efficient? You know, can you throw an employee at that spot? Whatever it is, you found that bottleneck, that choke point, that friction. Now how do you alleviate it? So now you're in business, these are business type things. Like, find the problem, fix the problem, new problem will occur, find problem, fix problem. Sometimes problems are just part of it. They're not a problem, they're a feature, right? Finishing takes time. You can do a lot of things to speed it up. You can do fast drying finishing, you can do all that sort of thing, but it's just still gonna take time, you know, and it's just part of the nature of it. Glue has to dry, you know, that's just what it is. You know, you glue something up, it's gotta dry for a certain amount of time. There's really no way around it. So you know that that's a feature of the business, not necessarily a bug. That's not a friction you can remove. It's not a bottleneck you can get rid of. So you have to kind of work around that. Now, in a small space, what you might find is, and I've run into this constantly, like my bottleneck is usually this table, because my outfeed table is also my assembly table, because I don't have a ton of space. So to alleviate that, my planer bench, my miter saw bench, things like that, and I have a small cart that I use in here, that's going to help me get things off of this table until I can get to the assembly phase. So basically, I'm just stashing things, and then when I need to, I bring them back to here. And then if I have to cut something again on the table saw, guess what? It's a pain in the butt. In a large space, you want to also keep something in mind here too. You want to have as many carts as you can possibly have. You want to have assembly tables on wheels, things like that. Stuff that you can move large amounts of material quickly and easily. Typically, if you have a large shop, the idea is that you're doing volume. That's how you're making more money. So you need to be able to move that volume quickly from place to place to place. That's going to really help things. You're eliminating trips back and forth, things like that. Now, the other thing too with friction and bottlenecks is you need to think about how many steps it's taking you. How many laps do you do around your building where you're not making money? You're just going to get this thing, that thing. So as you go through and you're like, hey, you know, I usually go from here, then I got to cross the building or across my shop to get to this tool and then bring it back to this tool. Maybe you want to start to position those things together to eliminate some of that friction in your workplace. So that's a big one, is find your bottlenecks, get rid of them, and eliminate the friction. And guess what? You typically don't foresee those things. Like sometimes you might, well, this might be a problem and you can get ahead of it, but typically those things don't pop up until you're actually working in the space. That's why we don't ever plan. So there you go, bottlenecks, friction, how to get rid of them. Okay, so all of that kind of leads to why we don't really plan, why we work in the space, things like that, is that you kind of have to evolve as you go. Now, what do I mean by that is you're going to find that there are certain jobs that you make the most amount of money doing, that give you the least amount of headaches, and those are the jobs that you want more of. So in business, the way that you get more of those is that A, maybe you turn down some jobs that are more of a pain in the ass, don't make you as much money. You get those out of the shop to free up time for the more profitable things. And B, you're going to gear your marketing towards that. But basically the idea here is if you follow these guidelines towards shop setup, is that you'll be able to evolve into those sorts of things. Now, I kind of always knew that cabinetry was the end goal, and I don't have the space yet to have full kitchens. That's something that I'm working on. But I've basically designed my shop to where I can start to optimize to do more cabinetry. That being said, I do love building furniture. I'll take as many of those jobs as I can, so long as, you know, they're profitable. But I have that flexibility and I have the ability to evolve into that. So if you have a big space, that's pretty easy to, you know, move things as you go. If you have a small shop though, that can be tough. And that's why we don't want to overclutter. We don't want to do things like that. The other thing is, as you decide to specialize or not, you may want to buy specialty tools. So behind me right there, you can see that I have a hinge boring machine. Now that's not a fixture in the shop where it's always going to be there. I basically just stash that, pull it out, use it when I need to, and then hide it again. But that comes down to, you know, a small shop tip is that you want to have as many things on wheels as reasonably possible. Now for me, my miter saw station is fixed. All of this storage right here is fixed. My planer bench is fixed. And my table saws and my assembly table are pretty much fixed. But with that being said, I have an extra router table. That thing's on wheels. I have a drum sander. That thing's on wheels. And then things like spindle sanders, like that hinge boring machine, they kind of get stashed because I don't use them all that often. I just pull them out when I need them. Now if I had the space, maybe I would have those things on wheels. And as I expand, I'd like to get a bandsaw in the shop. That'll probably be on wheels for the same reason. I can kind of tuck it out of the way, and then when I need to, I'll pull it out. What I don't want to have happen is to fall into, the first thing I said is over clutter, where I have to move 6 machines just to get to the one that I need. That's not a good thing, right? So be willing to evolve into your space and, you know, optimize for whatever the next best opportunity is. Because a lot of times we start off thinking we're going to build cutting boards, which I'm sure a lot of you probably thought. And then pretty quickly you realize that, I don't just want to build cutting boards. So don't optimize for that. Be flexible, you know, be ready to move and bob and weave as opportunities come. Okay, now let's get into the good stuff here. Let's talk about work zone function, okay? Even in my small shop, I have different zones to the shop, right? So right here I'm at my assembly table. Now, basically what I want to have is kind of like first order of retrieval type of situation. So what am I doing here? I'm actually assembling things. So I actually have all of my clamps within easy reach, right? So I have all of my sanding stuff over there within easy reach. I have a lot of my tools. Say I'm gluing together face frames. I can grab this, grab there, boom, I have all of my face frame stuff together. Say I have to do edge banding. All of that is pretty easy to get to in this one place. And then more importantly, I keep this thing on me everywhere I go. So everything in this is useful no matter where I am in the shop. If I had a big space, I would still have this. Basically, I have my remotes for my vac and my dust collector. I have a tape measure. I have some marking tools, and I have a square. These things have to follow me everywhere in the shop. I always have those right there. And then from there, how important is something to grab? Now, I like having things exposed. Maybe you don't. I do have some stuff in drawers. I know that immediately I have all my chisels, bench dogs, things like that. right here, and then in the drawer below that, I have some of my layout stuff, you know, that I can just quickly grab, tuck it back in. I don't have to walk across the shop to get to it. Same thing right here. Okay, I need to, you know, clamp together some miters. Boom, miter clamps. Oh, I need a drill. I got my drill. Impact driver, rather. And oh, hey, I need a pin nailer, a nail gun. Those are all right there. And what you don't see on camera is a whole bunch of that type of stuff. Now, if you have a larger space and you have zones, you're going to have an assembly zone, right? And if you have an assembly zone, you don't need clamps in your milling zone. So you want to store your clamps around your assembly tables. You know what I mean? Your sandpaper, things like that. Maybe you have a sanding station that you move around, but that's going to live in that area towards the end, not at the beginning. It doesn't make any sense to have all your sanding stuff next to your planer and joiner, right? So when you develop these sort of zones, you can start to put your specific tools in a place that's really easy for you to get to them. I'll give you another example here in sort of my small space, how I tend to have like a workflow. Okay, so here I may only be a few feet over. Pretty much I put the camera where I was just standing, and now I'm standing where the camera just was. But this is another zone. I still have access to my workbench. All of my pocket hole stuff is over there, so I can pretty quickly grab it. I have a big lip on my workbench where I can clamp things down to. So typically I'll do all my pocket hole work right here. My miter saw is right there. Any stock that I bring in that's pre-milled to make cabinet doors or face frames, it goes up there. That way I can just grab it straight to the miter saw and boom, how you doing? Keep her moving. Okay, so here's another work zone. I would still have that on my hip. And then on top of that, I have a few other odds and ends. Now this is the drill that I use constantly now. This is the 20 volt assembly tool. Dang it, installation driver. I did a whole video on installation drivers comparing the DeWalt 12 to the Milwaukee 12. Well, I just bought this one. This is now my main shop drill and I love it, but it's right here. It's an easy reach no matter where I need it. Okay, and then if you look at some of the shelving behind me here, you can sort of see what I was talking about. I have all of my sanding stuff. The bench is right there. It's easy to grab. I have all of my glue stuff. It's right there. It's easy to grab. All of my clamps are on that opposite wall. But basically, I can move in this one little area right here and not have any big issues. So this is kind of, you know, this area is an assembly area. That's another assembly area. But everything's sort of within reach to those areas. Now, if you go over to the front of the shop, that's more my breakdown area. You know, it's going into my table saw, things like that. And then I have my final assembly over there. So you sort of can figure out these zones and you have the first order of retrieval within those zones. What I don't want to do is run from that corner of the shop to that corner of the shop 6 times to complete one task. So I want to kind of group everything together to a degree. All of my router bits and things like that are close to my router tables. Or over there I have a lot of my handheld routers, things like that. So same thing, small shop, big shop. You want to kind of develop these zones within your space. That way you can set them up to be the most efficient in that space. Okay, so as we talked about zones, we talked a little bit about tool storage in there and my philosophy behind that, but let's get a little bit more into storage, right? So in a small space, we're going to start with one of the big ones, is the raw materials, the lumber. In a small space, you want to basically store the stuff where you can, right? Generally speaking, I do not have to grab every board foot of lumber in my shop at any given time, but I have all of these racks everywhere in my shop that's out of the way. It's not bothering anything being there. I can have lumber sit there for years if I want, and kind of do. But basically, all of that is out of my way. It does not get in the way of my actual work itself at all. Now, in a large space, it might be a little bit different. You might be cranking out some very serious volume, so you may have a much larger dedicated storage area for your hardwoods or plywoods or both, right? And that storage area is kind of where everything starts. Your raw material starts there as it moves around. In a small, in a small shop, you kind of just got to do what you got to do with the space. I don't really want material storage to inhibit me in any way, so it's all up there and out of the way, but I can still get to it. It's not a big deal. What I don't want is my tools being in a difficult to reach place, okay? And the other thing as far as like storage goes is you don't see a lot of shop cabinets in here. I have a lot of pack out stuff because I'm always going on site, things like that. If I didn't have pack out, I'd probably just have shelves. There is some shelving that stores things. But yeah, so small space, lumber storage, just find a way to make it work, you know what I mean? Large space, it's probably going to be like a big deal for you. You may even have forklifts, things like that to handle all of that stuff. It's a huge part of your process. With that all being said, another thing that you kind of want to consider too is that you don't want to run a just-in-time manufacturing type of thing. What do I mean by that? There was a Japanese principle that screwed everybody during COVID because the chain broke down. But basically, like Toyota would want the motor to show up and come off the truck into a car and then roll. They didn't want to have 17 motors sitting around. That's just-in-time manufacturing. If I'm doing a white oak project or a black walnut project, I want to make sure that I have extra white oak, extra black walnut. If I'm building cabinets, I better have extra plywood, those sorts of things, because I don't want to have to run out in the middle of a job and go get something. That's just nightmare fuel. So you need to have that extra stuff laying around. Now I'm a little bit out of control right now, especially with all this white oak, but that's something you need to plan for in all of your storage. Okay, while we're talking about storage and things like that, let's talk about budget, okay? Now, if you watched part 1, you'll know that I talk about not spending all your money on your table saw, things like that. Go watch that after this. It's a good watch. I think you'll like it. And get subscribed for the next part. I'm already working on it. So the big thing now is that when you're in business, this is no longer a hobby. Your budget is no longer just focused on having the greatest shop in the world and the best tools and Festool everything. Your budget now is paying your bills, right? You have to market. Hate to break it to you, you have to spend some money on marketing, most likely. Even if that marketing money is just building stuff to build out a portfolio so that you can get more sales, right? You have to spend some money on marketing. Sometimes you have to have the thing first to show people you can do it to get the sales, right? So you have money that you need to spend on things besides just tools and besides just storage. Now, if I was not also a carpenter who was going out in the field all the time, I wouldn't have pack out anything. But if you look at my shop, there are no shop-built cabinets everywhere, okay? I am really, really, really against that for business purposes. Now, here's why. Number one is, my benches that are in here, I maybe have 6 hours total in building all of them. My benches that are in here, not counting my workbench, this cost me under $1,000. That was probably $200. That was probably $300, okay? If I did cabinets instead of these, I would have a situation where I would spend thousands and thousands of dollars and it would take me weeks. Not only do I spend the money, I'm also losing the time. Like, that's like, all right, just give you like a ballpark. Let's say I make $5,000 a week. It didn't just cost me, $1,000 in material in a week to make it. It also cost me the $5,000 in opportunity cost because I wasn't working during that time, right? Or whatever it is that you make a week. So shop-built cabinets are extremely expensive. Sometimes it's best just to buy or just do what I do and throw it up with framing material. It works just fine. And then you know what happens? You decide, man, I do really need a cabinet. You can just build one and slide it under your framed workbench and it'll be fine. So that's a big one when you're talking about budget, laying out your shop, things like that. As far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't have a single cabinet built in there. That's just me. But yeah, I'm a big believer in don't spend a ton of your money and a ton of your time on shop fixtures, right? You're in business now. Your shop is designed to build things that you sell, not build things for the shop. I'm not against shop improvements. I just think you should do them as quickly and cheaply as you possibly can. That's it. And the same thing goes with my tooling. I don't need Festool everything, right? So once you're in this business mindset, you're going pro, your money has to go to more things than just the shop itself. You're not working for tools anymore or anything like that. So keep that in mind when you're talking about like your budget. Let's talk for a moment about safety and comfort. Now, although I'm a bit Spartan with these sort of things, I do believe that you should have a safe space and you should have a relatively comfortable space. That being said, I air condition my shop because I'm fat, it's hot, I don't want to deal with it, and I own the place. So I'm going to put air conditioning in. Same goes with heat. You'll notice that the height of my workbenches, they're all roughly the same height. The table saw in this bench is actually slightly higher. That does a few things. One is this is a comfortable height for me to work at. I'm not hunched over, I'm not working up here. This is a pretty comfortable height for me to work at. Also, with having all of my benches at roughly the same height, if I have to cut something or have something really big, I don't have to worry about it banging into these benches. It can just slide right over, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Proper insulation is a good thing, but also proper ventilation and airflow. You want to be able to get the dust down once it's in here. If you're heating off of like, you know, oil, kerosene, something like that, it has to be properly ventilated. You don't want to be in here with a torpedo heater gassing yourself out. That's not good. Your floor, you don't really want to work on concrete. I have a wooden floor in here, but I still have these horse stall mats scattered around. So there's just some little kind of comforts that I think that you should have. You know, the biggest tool is you. You're the biggest tool. How do you like that? Yeah, I called you a tool. But you have to be able to function pretty well. And if your feet are hurting all day long, or you can't breathe in here or anything like that, that's no good. So you do want to prioritize some degree of comfort, some degree of safety. Those things should always be kind of taken in stride here too. Obviously, if you need things like fire extinguishers, you know, first aid kits, you want to have those scattered around your space, easy to get to in case of emergency, because guess what? Those things only pop up in emergencies. Okay, let's talk for a minute about power and dust collection. Okay, so obviously, if I'm telling you to not plan and do all of that, it's very difficult to have your hard piping in for dust collection, right? So I typically don't recommend anyone start off with really expensive dust collection. I think the dust collection is important, but I don't think that is like an initial thing you need to go after. I have a little mobile dust collector over here that I can move around, and then I have shop vacs, and that kind of will get you going as you start. As you start to solidify your space, that's something that I'm planning to build an addition on this shop, and when I do that, I'll upgrade my dust collector and I'll start to actually hard pipe things in. Because I've worked in the space and I have things kind of figured out that I know this is always going to be here, this might move, that sort of deal. So yeah, so dust collection is one of those things. The overhead boom arms are awesome. I should build one of those in here. I really should. So that's a big one, is that eventually, yeah, you're gonna like run all your hard ports and stuff like that, but just start off with something mobile that you can hook up as you go. I know it's a pain in the butt, but it's a good start to get you going until you figure everything out. I think one of the worst case scenarios would be is that you plan everything out, you put everything in there, you run all these hard ducts, and you get your stuff going, and then you figure out that the space doesn't work very well. And now you feel married to it because you spent all the money on the ductwork and things like that for dust collection. So you don't want to move it to what's more efficient. So now you have an inefficient shop, and guess what? You won't make as much money, you won't be as happy, things like that. So if you're kind of following the gist of this video, is everything sort of flexible. That being said, I also want to put as many outlets in the shop as I possibly can. The last thing I want to have to do is unplug a machine to plug in another machine. So when I did have this put in, I had my electrician put multiple breakers. So like this cluster of outlets is on one breaker, this cluster, this cluster, this cluster. So I have a ton of power in here. I can plug tools in and never unplug them again. And that's a fantastic situation to be in. The other thing this kind of ties back into safety is I do not want power cords laying all over the floors. I used to deal with that. I hated it. I do have some fixed power cords that run off in this direction here, but the rest of the floor is open. I try and keep all my hoses over here too, so that I have sort of open walking space in this direction, though I'm not, trust me, I've spent a lot of time tripping on tangled up hoses and cords. And then I don't know if you can really see it, but I left a sander plugged in throughout this whole thing. I have overhead power as well, and those are all retractable. Again, the boom arm would be awesome for that situation. I highly recommend those. I think I'm gonna have, that might be a project for this winter. We'll see. But yeah, so your considerations for power, you want to have way more than you possibly think you'll ever use, because guess what? You'll use it. I do also have 220 in some strategic spots. You want to build that up to the way better than you think you need. Even if you're only going to run one tool at a time, you still want to have it. That's just a good thing. So power, as much of it as you possibly can. The more outlets, the better. And dust collection, I think starting out, you know, just go low cost and then build up to that later. That's something that I think will be a next year deal with me, is the better dust collection. A dust mask will make any tool's dust collection perfect. Another big one is light and visibility. As you notice right now where I am standing, I am actually like washed out by the light. This isn't great for filming, but this isn't a studio, even though I'm kind of using it as one. This is very much a workspace. So I want as much light in here as I can, which kind of pointed out to me, since I built this loft where I was in that last cut and where I'm sort of standing now, it's very dark. So I need to put some lights in there, right? I have just regular outlets with those panels. I just looked up, that was a bad idea. With those multi-panel LEDs, I usually get about a year or two out of them, and they do a great job lighting everything up. The lighting is definitely important. You need to be able to see what you're doing for quality standards, safety standards, all of those sorts of things. Lighting is definitely important. One thing that I have not mentioned at all is finishing, okay? I could have mentioned this a lot of times throughout this video, but this is important to me. I think that you should make it a priority to have your own finishing space, right? If you have a large shop, you want to devote a ton of that space, not a ton, but enough of that space to make finishing as efficient as possible. You want to have it walled off so that your overspray dust doesn't get into your wood dust doesn't get into your finishing, those sorts of things. If you're in a small space, it's very, very difficult to do that. Now, one of the first things that I did in my business that really gave me the ability to go from like struggling paycheck to paycheck to making real money was I separated my finishing shop from my wood shop. Now, I just bought like a 10x16 roll-off barn from the Amish. It showed up the day it showed up. I built some quick drying racks. I ran a 100-foot extension cord out to the thing, and I was spraying that day. My workflow, I've done a ton of cabinet painting, okay? I hate it. It's really profitable though. And it allowed me to, for the first time, not have to shut the whole shop down to finish a project. Now, if that is not, this is getting out of the shop setup thing. If that's not something that's feasible at this time, there are finishes you can use that are going to work well in your space, and you want to be as quick dry as possible so you can get the project finished and get it the hell out to start the next one. But that is a big one, is that your finishing space, unless you're farming all your finishing out, in which case no big deal. But if you're doing your own finishing, you want to have a dedicated space for that in your shop. Now, I've since built a new finishing space. I'm not using that shed anymore, but I'm not going to show you that today because one, it's not done, although it is being used already. And two, you're going to have to get subscribed and watch my 2026 shop tour because I'll go over everything really good there. But yeah, finishing, I just wanted to make it its own special thing. It's the end of the project, right? If you screw up in finishing, you've screwed up the project. So I think that that's important enough to break it down to that should be its own thing. Okay, so basically if you watch this video, you follow my advice, this is what you should end up with. You should end up with a shop that's very practical, that gives you the ability to be flexible and to potentially scale going forward. That's what we're really after here. We're not going to get to the perfect space overnight, right? And if you do create the perfect space, you may end up changing the things that you do as the markets change and everything else. So we want to create a situation in which we have the best shop for the business, right? And you want to have the ability to scale, especially if you're already in a large shop, you know what I mean? But what you can do once you get in that, start timing yourself. I think that is a great thing. How long does this task take me? How long does this setup take me? I figured out that I can pretty much swap out the router tables, set it up in less than 8 minutes, you know what I mean? Things like that. That'll kind of help you eliminate the friction as you find it. But basically, yeah, so now you should have a shop that is flexible enough for you to do whatever you need to do. You can add tools, you can take away tools, you know, you can scale. You can start to build your business out of a shop like this. Instead of being like really, really rigid, you want to be as flexible as possible and you want to be as fast as possible, because guess what? Money loves speed. And you want to go pro, then you want to make money. All right, so thank you so much for watching. Do me a favor, get subscribed, leave any comments, any questions. I would love to answer them for you. The next one we're going to come out, I don't want to give it away just yet, but we're going to keep this series going. Ask me some questions. I need your input. Did I miss something? Am I screwing something up? Can I learn something from you? Because I would love to. Until then, thank you so much for being here, and go build shit.